Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's people starting to come in now for this session today, which is being hosted by Cappfinity on Gen Z and the future of learning. I'm going to hand shortly to Steph Hopper, from Cappfinity, and we're hoping that Helen can join us from National Grid. She's got a couple of technical issues, so please bear with us while we try and get her into the call today as well. We're going to be talking for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to have time at the end for Q&A. So if you do have any questions for Steph and Helen, please do put them in the Q&A, and we will make sure there's time at the end to have a good conversation. So Steph, okay, we can see Helen's here too. So I'm going to hand to you while we get Helen sorted in terms of the panel. Thanks, Steph.
Great, thank you very much, and welcome everyone to today's webinar on Gen Z and the future of learning. As Georgia said, we had a few technical problems getting Helen into the room, but she's hoping to join on voice. I think she is there. We just need to get her set up as a panelist so that we can talk to her, because at the moment, I think she's muted. Helen, can you say hello to us? Looks like she's currently muted. We'll wait and come back. Oh, there we go.
I am. Oh, hello everyone. Sorry about this. It's technology at its finest.
Brilliant. Well, we've got you there, Helen, which is great. So I'll ask you to introduce yourself in a moment. We'll get started though. So my name's Stephanie Hopper. I'm the director of the talent management practice at Cappfinity, and we are responsible for the design and the delivery of all our talent management solutions and programs. I'll tell you a bit more about Cappfinity in a moment, but I'm going to ask Helen from National Grid to introduce herself now. It's so ironic we can't see her face. I thought about having a slide with her face on it, and then I thought, well, that's pointless because we're both on video. But there you go, lesson learnt. Helen, over to you.
Oh, thanks, Steph. Well, I've got a big smile on my face for everybody. So, because I'm just laughing at the hilarity of this situation. So very nice. Thank you very much all for making the time to join. Hopefully you've got some lunch so you can listen at the same time and hear the conversation. So Helen Fawcett, Head of Early Careers at National Grid. So my main focus is making sure that our students and graduates in the US and the UK have a greater experience when they join National Grid, and that we have a great development programme so we can progress and retain them within the business as we have lots of big challenges ahead as we try and reach net zero.
Great, thank you, Helen. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, a brief intro to Cappfinity won't take very long for those of you who are not familiar with us. We're going to talk about the future of learning and the changing world of work. We're going to look at some tensions that really represent a sort of evolution of beliefs and approaches, and then we'll leave you with some things to consider as learning and development professionals. We also, towards the end, will have time for questions. So yeah, have a think about anything that you'd like to ask. Feel free to pop it in the Q&A as we go along, but we'll come to that at the end and Georgia will facilitate that for us. So in terms of Cappfinity today, we began pioneering the skills-based movement when we were founded in 2005. And we've always felt that people have more potential than what you see on the surface. So appreciating someone for so much more than their role, their experience, or their qualifications. And we're elated to see the market waking up to this movement. And we've now got locations in Australia, the US, and the UK, over 250 clients in over 80 countries, and really a great appreciation of a variety of industries and sectors. We have solutions, products and services in talent acquisition and talent management from apprentice level to exec level. And we work with clients around three key pillars in order to support them in building a skills-based organisation: defining skills, measuring skills, and developing skills. Our expertise is right the way across the people agenda, from pre-skilling candidates to recruiting, onboarding, developing, and finally to support internal mobility around the business. And we've got 6 categories of different sort of modes of development. So firstly, insight tools, really leveraging and harnessing the psychology expertise from our assessment and strengths profile teams, coaching, including sessions to debrief those insight tools, and also our virtual reality for development, digitized self-led learning done in, work that you do in your own time in the flow of work, our core workshops, additional workshops and large group sessions for lots of different levels, and then our innovative group learning such as our hackathon. So enough about Cappfinity, let's get into the meat of what we want to talk about today. And I'm sure some of you, and I'm sure many of you on the call work in learning and development, and actually you'll probably be familiar with some of these recommendations that are often made. So there's a lot of discussion about, what the next generation needs in order to learn. And these three themes seem to kind of consistently pop up and are frequently referenced as a method of engaging and attracting future workers. So the first being that today's learning should be, embrace a TikTok style, short, visual, repeatable. The second being that there are core skills we all need to focus on and that they're particularly important to Generation Z, so self-motivation, self-awareness, accountability, resilience. And finally, purpose being a big driver in careers today. But what do those ideas tell us specifically about the younger generation that wouldn't actually be effective for any learners that we have to support or work with? In each case, they would be effective or important for any audience, and they're just good principles for learning generally, rather than specific to Gen Z. So TikTok has been brilliantly designed to help sustain interest and, what the younger generation are now used to. But just because a baby boomer prefers a newspaper doesn't mean we should deliver their learning and development content via a newspaper. Would those skills help only Gen Z if developed, or would they help all generations? Let's face it, we'd all like to work with people who are self-motivated, who've got some resilience, who are self-aware. And so it's important to establish whether those are sort of symptoms or causes of the real differences between age groups. And finally, we'll come back to purpose later, but all humans actually need a sense of purpose. It's a driver of our behaviour as human beings. Yes, Gen Z have grown up in a world that's, surrounded by important causes, the environment, social issues and so on. But does that explain really their full context and motivation? I think maybe not. So what if lots of the talk about the differences in generations is merely underlying characteristics of being human? Instead, we need to look elsewhere to understand those differences. So what is it we understand and know about Gen Z? I see no hope for the future of our people if they are dependent on the frivolous youth of today. They think they know everything and are always quite sure about it. An attitude on the part of young folk which is best described as grossly thoughtless, rude and utterly selfish. A few 35-year-old friends are just now leaving their parents' nest. They're doing the kinds of things our society used to expect from 25-year-olds. A common talking point online is how the current generation aren't really ready or wanting or able to do the jobs that we expect of them, how they lack resilience. Talk to Jodie Foster if you've seen it in the news. She definitely is not a fan of Generation Z. There seems to be consensus that this generation is the worst that's kind of ever been seen. These thoughts aren't anything new or different, though. In fact, it's the belief the older generations have always had about the younger people, which is very consistent. So let's face it, we've all been the layabout generation at some time in our lives, according to our elders. So what does that tell us? I guess it tells us that preconceptions about young people haven't really changed. History just repeats itself. What has changed is the context in which Gen Z have grown up in. Let's pause for a moment though, and before we dive into that context, I want to know what the best decade is for music. So Wale, if you could launch the poll, I'd like you to vote on which decade you think is the best decade for music. So is it the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the noughties or the teens? Which decade do you think is the best decade for music? And whilst I wait for your responses, Helen, what do you think was the best decade for music?
Oh, I definitely think the 90s. So a big Oasis fan, actually. But slightly controversial in my house. My husband thinks 70s rock's the best. So
your husband's not helping the point I want to make. So we'll forget about what your husband said. And we'll go with you saying the 90s. Thank you, Helen. And Wale earlier on said he thinks, I think he said the noughties, while we were having our technical difficulties. So Wale, could you release the results of the poll for us now, please? Okay, so a lot of us think the 80s, some think the 90s, a few think the 70s, a few think the 60s, no one thinks the last decade was the best, and a few think the noughties. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Wale, and thank you everyone for participating. So just like every generation has been the layabout generation at some point in their lives, each decade seems to have been the best for music. It just depends on who you ask. What determines the best era? Age is really the biggest determinant. Age has the biggest effect at driving our perceptions of quality. In fact, the best decade for music is usually the one after you were born. So my bet is that Helen, loving the 90s, is probably an 80s baby. If you were born in the 40s, you likely have a stronger preference for music in the 50s. Why? Well, music is tied very closely to feelings of nostalgia for better times. Music takes us back to our formative years. You know, the trend is similar for films and radio and so on. So what's the point we're making here? I guess it's that context and age do a lot to alter our perceptions of what good looks like and what normal means. And understanding other people's context is the first step to connecting with them and getting the most out of them. So let's now have a look at Gen Z's normal and hear a bit about Helen's experiences at National Grid. So on the slide, a few facts here remind us of what the working world today is like for many people. And it's no different today than it is from sort of years gone by, it is very different from years gone by. I mean, things like informal dress codes, I know they didn't exist when I first came into the working world. Working from home being normal rather than maybe a privilege. And, you know, the number of virtual meetings we all attend. I'm sure a lot of the things that you're seeing on the slide there are not a shock to you at all. But the impact of these things on different generations is what is key here. Boomers will have witnessed an epic shift in their working lives from when they first arrived in the workplace. I'm not a boomer, but anyway, I just thought I'd put that out there. I almost am, but I'm not. And hybrid meetings are something that is completely different, for instance, to the world they knew earlier in their career. For Gen Z, it's their default. They have no comparison. They've walked into a world where hybrid meetings are completely normal. And this different focus really impacts the approach we need to think about when it comes to learning and development. You can compare this, I guess, to other sort of seismic behavioural shifts. So, for instance, in 1983, when seatbelts were introduced, I can remember that happening. One generation then had to develop a new habit, a new approach to travelling. You'll remember the days when, or some people remember the days when kids just bounced around on the back seat and there was no such thing as a seatbelt. And for another generation, it was just normal from the get-go. You never didn't wear a seatbelt and required no new habits or thinking. So these differences have created tensions between the old way and the new way. And they're the areas in L&D that we believe we should focus on. And that's what Helen and I will come to in a moment, is those tensions. But first of all, it'd be good just to get a little bit of context from Helen in terms of the early careers professionals she's been working with. So Helen, I'm just wondering, you know, what has and does the context look like for National Grid grads in recent years?
I know it's an interesting one. So for our graduates in the US and UK, like you say, it's a big switch for them in terms of working hybrid. They're very used to it, they feel comfortable with it, but we actually see for them that actually all the etiquette surrounding it is quite can sometimes be quite a learning curve for them. So how you interact in a meeting, how you contribute is very different. They feel savvy with the technology, but actually how they operate in that environment can sometimes be quite a learning curve for them, actually. And we're finding that the context of recent years in terms of the pandemic, we are seeing graduates have lacking confidence when presenting in person, or if they have to travel and find different offices or different sites that we might have, because they've had less exposure to in-person events, whether it's been, a lack of work experience, time at university in person, or work, further internships, etc., that they're really feeling it actually when we come together in person to understand how to navigate it. So we're putting a lot of emphasis in making sure that they do feel comfortable, and that they feel like they can slip from the kind of technological world of being on a Teams call into being in a room and collaborating with people in person.
And what are some of the things you've done to accommodate for that sort of lack of experience, in terms of things, as basic as travelling to an office, I guess, and finding that location and feeling confident in person?
So we've done a few things. So if I take just our graduates that are joining this September, we know some of them are quite anxious. So we've created some support for them during the onboarding journey, where we send photographs of what the journey looks like. So our offices are in Warwick. So from the train station onwards, we've got some photographs to make them feel comfortable. We give them lots of guidance and support, and they have mentors from previous graduate years as well to help them. So we're trying to create that support network to make sure that they feel safe to ask those questions, and kind of no question is too silly. They will we'll make sure that they get the support that they need to make them feel comfortable.
And how does that differ, Helen, for you from the world of work that you came into?
Oh, it's quite an interesting one, because you were right with your age guess in terms of my music choices. So when I joined the workplace, I think I joined in quite a big recruitment wave for a financial services company, and it was pretty much, there's your desk, there's your computer, this is what you do. I can't even remember a corporate induction. So that lack of support there, and it was very much just sit with somebody and learn the job. Where now, obviously it's kind of so much more support about individuals to make sure that we're all comfortable. So it's poles apart from my experience.
Oh, and how would you say things have changed over the last few years at National Grid specifically? Have you seen a difference? Or maybe it's more in terms of the time you've been working in early careers, maybe even kind of before National Grid?
Yeah, we've seen quite a lot of changes actually, in terms of the support we give to the graduates. I think we focus much more on pastoral care now than we've ever done, in terms of making sure that we give them the right support as individuals. So whether that's extra support for neurodiversity, whether that's extra support, we have quite a lot of graduates who report that they are struggling with anxiety. So we put the support in place for them, and that's the biggest shift I've seen actually. I've worked in 2 organisations in kind of early careers related roles, and that shift has been unbelievable actually in terms of that extra support we're giving.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you, Helen. I think we'll get on to the tensions, because the differences that we're talking about of what has created the tensions between the old way and the new way. And they're the areas, I guess, that we need to really think about as L&D professionals. They're the areas that we need to kind of really focus and lean in on. So the first tension is, I guess, really thinking about the fact that the older generation grew up in a world where you kept quiet, you kept your head down, and the belief that what didn't kill you made you stronger. You just got on with things, and you had to work hard and put up maybe with difficult situations. And this has really shifted because we've developed much better support in schools to level the playing field for difference. For instance, the kind of amount of learning support that is provided and accommodations made for all needs within the education sector is incredible compared to, I know for my husband, he was dyslexic and never knew he was dyslexic until he turned 40, but he just thought he was stupid at school. And that was probably quite a normal experience for a lot of people in education. And also now there's more of a focus on mental health in the curriculum. So Mental Health Week is celebrated within schools. Children are encouraged to talk about their emotions and their feelings quite openly. But this has created, we feel, a bit of a resilience perception gap, where one group sees a rise in mental health issues, like everyone has a diagnosis or a challenge, everyone's seeing a therapist, whereas the other side see those topics as maybe normal and kind of expected. And the reality is that while youth mental health issues are on the rise, which both younger and older generations recognise, NHS England have found that that's recognised by all generations, the perceptions really vary between those generations for the reason for this trend, which King's College uncovered in a study. They found that younger people think the rise in reported mental health issues in the young is a result of people talking more about mental health. They're kind of liberated and they're empowered. Whereas baby boomers are more likely to suggest that the rise is because young people are less resilient. So they're kind of maybe a bit fragile or overprotected. This sort of new normal of special accommodations and, increased awareness can be at odds with the expectations for people at work. And perhaps we haven't adjusted in the workplace as much to the way education has. What we perceive as normal at work is perhaps at odds with the experience newer generations have had in their life so far. And actually, we see this in some of Cappfinity's data. So looking at our strengths profile tool, unconditionality is a realised strength for younger but not older employees. And unconditionality, our definition of it is you accept people for who and what they are without ever judging them. So we think this is what is often mistakenly sort of discussed as a difference in resilience. And the reality that Gen Z have actually lived through some really tricky times: COVID, Brexit, economic downfall, accelerated technical skills need, and they are just more vocal about their well-being and know what to look for, whereas 20 years ago, that was probably just working. So, Helen, I'm just wondering, have you noticed this kind of misconception between generations in your experiences?
Yeah, we've definitely seen it, and I've seen it from both sides actually, in terms of some of our US graduates I was with the other week, in terms of what they were telling me of how they perceive other generations as well, actually. But yeah, we're definitely feeling that challenge between the differences, but we're trying to put the frameworks in place to support everybody so that, we can, as you say, protect that difference for everybody, but give them the work experience that they need, whether that's through different stretch projects, rotations that we do. But the main thing we try to do is build that element of trust whether it's between their manager or their co-workers, so that they feel that safe to be themselves and to say, about whatever that may be that makes them individuals, that they feel safe to be that person.
And has there been that sort of discussion about early careers professionals lacking resilience, and how has that sort of presented itself within National Grid?
Yeah, I think there has been some conversations about it. I think in some respects, Steph, we're quite lucky. Like the graduates in particular that we're seeing come through at the minute, are really great calibre of graduates that we're getting, in terms of we don't get much feedback from them about resilience, nor from their managers. I think because we've got quite a curious group of graduates, I think they're keen to learn, they're keen to develop. And they understand what they're signing up for in terms of how we will stretch them through the 18-month programme and beyond. And I think because we have lots of role models come and talk to them from previous cohorts, that helps them see where they can get to and what kind of learn from them about how to keep their energy and how to build that resilience as well.
And what do you think are the best ways to kind of stretch that graduate population? What have you seen work really well?
I think what we do is give them options. We don't try to mandate some of the things that are the stretch, because we believe if we put a selection on offer, they will pick the things that that they're passionate about and maybe are more tailored to them. So we offer volunteering options for different charities. We give them opportunities to actually help us. So the previous year's cohort always help welcome and develop the next cohort. So it isn't me that says hello to the graduates on their first day, it's some of our current graduates. So, give them that stretching, being in a big auditorium with hundreds of people. So we look for variety so they can pick what suits them.
Right. Okay, brilliant. All right, we'll get on to the next tension, Helen. And the next tension is really, I guess, in the past, career success was measured by how quickly someone could rise to the top of an organisation. The amount you were paid, your job title, your status. And this appears to be more opposed to a more modern type of thinking, which focuses more on meaning and purpose. And we will have seen that, all of us, featured through the pandemic, when there was the kind of great resignation and people changed direction and sought to find something that gave them more meaning, as everyone sort of, I guess, recognized the fragility of life, and we were more, driven to find purpose on a day-to-day basis. And a common talking point, which I mentioned at the beginning about Gen Z, is how purpose-driven they are. And they've lived through these huge amounts of social environmental change and are far more aware of issues in society than ever before. And this is reflected in the data. So a LinkedIn survey of the workforce from 21-22 showed that those hoping to quit their job in the next 6 months, 80% of Gen Z agree it was to look for better alignment with their values. But we think this is another misconception, and focusing on purpose alone perhaps isn't doing justice to Gen Z's full context and is looking at them a bit too narrowly. This group is also living in one of the most difficult economic times we've seen. And in Deloitte's Gen Z survey, the high cost of living is their top concern around the globe. And also they're responding to some of these financial pressures in the same report by taking on side jobs. I know in the ISE development survey, I remember Georgia, when she presented it at the conference, said, there was a notable increase in the proportion of employers who reported that graduates were leaving their organisation due to pay dissatisfaction as opposed to development opportunities. And that had risen from 40% in 2023 to 51% in 2024. And I guess 89% of students are said to worry about their future because of the economic climate. And this is mirrored in an increase in sort of remuneration and advancement being a real motivator for selecting a graduate job. I think LinkedIn's future recruiting report, people were asked to select their top factors when considering a new job, and just 19% of Gen Z would prioritise a company driven by values that matches your own, compared with 34% of baby boomers. So in other words, baby boomers are 75% more likely than Zoomers to prioritise their own personal values when choosing a job. So values are important in the current economic climate. It is important to balance purpose with process. So how do you signal, Helen, at the sort of hiring and attraction stage, and maybe later on, once onboarded, that you as an employer want to retain them and enable them to develop and progress their career?
Yeah, no, we do. So I think the main thing we use is the role models from previous cohorts. We show what's possible in terms of progression within career if you commit to National Grid. We're very lucky that our CEO came through the graduate route. So, so he's a great role model for what is possible with us, and he comes and meets them on their first day and talks to them. And then we very much, we share what targets we have about retention and progression of grads to show them that we're serious and give them a real focus and support element on their career as well, so that we can help them navigate their career and also understand how they can build the building blocks at the start. And
have you noticed this kind of difference in terms of generational drive or attention, like needing to choose one over the other? Because you've got a pretty big purpose at National Grid, and I'm wondering where you, like, how you see that play out.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We have got a massive purpose at National Grid, and we do see that. However, we do see that the talent that we do lose is potentially usually still within the energy sector, that they go to another part of it. So we're happy to keep the skills within the sector, but it is usually related to reward. So we can lose talent because there is a better package elsewhere. So it shows that even though we've probably got an amazing purpose in comparison to some organisations, with the cost of living biting, then they will follow something that suits their own personal needs.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Helen. I'm just switching slide decks. I apologise, but for some reason, the slide I needed next has disappeared out the screen. So we're having one of those wonderful days with technology where I've had to move back to a different slide deck. So hopefully you can all see my final tension now on the screen. And this final tension, I guess, is less, the first two were really misconceptions, I would say. This one is more about a shift in the industry, which I'm sure everyone on the webinar will be familiar with, but it has a huge impact on learning and development. You know, the world older generation started their careers in was a world where qualifications, university, time in the game were really valued. And the last few years, there's been a real sort of shift happening where there's far more of a focus on skills-based hiring and learning. And there's a sort of general mismatch between what education and students maybe themselves see as important and what employers are now asking of their the graduates who are coming in. So hiring and learning in the workplace is usually focused on experience and qualifications alone. It's not surprising then that, you know, students believe that existing industry experience is this top skill they think employers value. That's from Brighter Network research last year. And in fact, it shows really that there is this sort of general mismatch between what soon-to-be grads think employers want and what employers are actually looking for. There's also the focus on diversity and inclusion and demonstrating you're an equal opportunities employer. And that's made easier when there's a focus on skills. Historically underrepresented groups are now able to shine and compete with more traditional metrics of success. And a skills focus, I guess, supports a more kind of flexible and adaptable workforce where people can come with different experiences, and those transferable skills are really valued. And I think skills really helps us to sort of democratize the workplace beyond which university you went to, or, you know, whether you have the relevant skills right now, and will really help you sort of thrive within the organization. And I suppose in addition, you know, when we switch our focus from experience to skills, we open up a job market to a much wider pool of people, and it creates a language that kind of transcends industry, widens the pool of potential, and provides better role targeting. So the future of work is probably more about the skills you have than the length of time you've used them. And so, Helen, I'm just wondering, what's the skills discussion in your organisation at the moment?
Yeah, so we're just doing a piece of work to understand what skills we do need, and we're looking at what technology can enable that as well for the future. So it's quite a big project, as you can imagine, and we need to get everything in place to look at our job architecture and our career pathways as well. But we've got quite big ambitions in terms of our recruitment over the next coming years as we reach for net zero. So we want to make sure that, you know, it's the right thing to do to take a skills-based approach, because we want to make sure that we get the workforce that we need to meet the targets that we've got.
And in terms of like working at National Grid, how can you communicate like the types of opportunities available, you know, not just the sort of linear ones that take you up a Christmas tree, but where you can sort of transfer your skills maybe from one business unit or department to another? I think it's so challenging for organisations to do that, but it opens so much potential when people see they can do that.
Yeah, and we try to do that within not just in the early careers part of our team, but our broader performance and development team, to show case studies, to show the moves that folks are making, and we get them to talk about their career journey. So we do quite a lot of fireside chats in the business where leaders talk about their career journeys. And don't get me wrong, some are the linear moves, but you know, we really like to find the folks who've had career changes, you know, or had that moment where they have had to take a sideways move, but it's been the best move they've ever made in their career as well. So we try to keep the conversation going as much as we can do.
Right. And I guess, like, I don't know how much you have to talk to the universities, Helen, but I'm just wondering, when you think about schools and universities, how can they prepare students for the world of work with the sort of essential employability skills?
Yeah, I think the main thing is for them to I think it'd be better to have more conversations actually in terms of how they can prepare graduates, you know, we're seeing them, you know, sometimes there is a small gap in terms of what we're expecting as work readiness, in terms of how people show up. But I think it would be good for them to understand the ways of work now. You know, as you talked about at the start of the call about, you know, how the introduction of AI and hybrid working, etc., is kind of more reality in terms of how we work and what ambitions we've got. So I think there's definitely more work to be done there.
More collaboration. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Helen. Georgia, what I'm going to suggest is that we go back to the, I know we've had a couple of questions. We go to the questions, and then I've got a couple of slides that can bring things to a close. And that also conveniently lets me swap back to the slide deck I needed all along. I don't know what's going on today, but I'll have it ready.
Thank you, Steph. And yes, absolutely. We've got a few questions here. And apologies, everyone, for the gremlins in the Zoom works today. But well done, Steph and Helen, for getting through the majority of today's session with us. I've actually got a quick question to start with for Helen. Helen, you were talking about understanding the individual's needs, some maybe coming with anxiety or neurodiverse needs. How are you getting to understand those individual needs? How are you encouraging your new joiners to tell you and share what they need when they're on their way into the organisation?
Yeah, I mean, we ask them actually in terms of during the onboarding process, we do an anonymous survey in terms of that, and that they can then put their names in to obviously share more details about themselves. So we do that. So we you know, and we get a good response rate. I mean, I'm not saying it's perfect. We probably don't get 100% of people, you know, acknowledging it, but we do actually get quite a lot of people raising it. So to give context, last year's intake was 108 grads. We had about 30 during that survey that said they needed extra support. So we made sure that they got it. And then, you know, we talk about what support's available so that if someone's sitting, you know, in the room thinking it may help them, that they can raise their hand and access it as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And that's great to hear you get such a good response rate, because I know a number of our members really struggle to encourage and then actively support their new joiners in that regard. So thank you for sharing. A broader question to both of you. In terms of, you know, talk today about, you know, how people perceive Gen Z. It feels more negative than previous generations, albeit we obviously talked about the context. But do you have any thoughts as to why it's so much more negative feeling towards our current new gen compared to those of us in previous gens?
Shall I go, Helen? And then you can...
Yeah, you go, Steph. Yeah.
I mean, I actually think this is about, there's more sources overall talking about stuff that we can access. So, you know, when I entered the workforce, there was only TV and there was only newspapers. Whereas now, when you say social media, I feel like it's quite a small, it sounds like a small thing, but actually there's so many channels, so many sources, both formal and informal, where we can actually push out messaging and live and real-time information or recorded information. So anything that's said can be over-exaggerated, I think, really easily. And I also think that our filter bubbles are more concentrated, you know. We're probably all thinking about that with the general election. My daughter was asking me about a candidate in our area locally, and she said, do you think she's an independent candidate? Do you think she's doing okay? And I said, I have no idea, because I'm only looking at her at the moment. So, you know, that's honesty about confirmation bias. And, you know, it's very much alive and kicking, and social media kind of encourages that. So we're sort of always hearing from the same people. You like what someone says, you hear more of that same stuff. And we're not very good at looking back and looking forward, I think. We're very much in the current, you know, moment all the time.
I think that's a really good point on the algorithms as well. Sorry, Helen, go on.
I was going to say as well, you know, kind of agreeing with Steph. It was quite interesting. Steph very kindly came to our team offsite a few weeks ago and talked through some of these tensions. We had an open discussion as a team, and a member of the team who's Gen Z came across and said, thank you very much for representing my generation correctly, because she sees so much, you know, in social media and everything. So I think it's just important to have conversations like this to kind of dispel some myths.
Brilliant. Thank you both. And that leads me on to the next question, which is how can our audience today, our viewers today, take away some of these messages and help have those internal conversations to try and help the generation and to help the internal dialogues?
Helen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, no, I can go first on this one. So I think what we've done at National Grid is just really think about, we've got some quite high targets in terms of recruitment of our graduates. So think about who are we bringing in and what are their needs going to be, and then just forecast that in terms of what support you need to take in place, but also take managers on the journey. You know, anybody who supports or helps those graduates once they join the business, they need this awareness. I hear so many times managers calling Gen Z millennials. You know, there's still quite a lot of myths, misconceptions, wrong phrases said. So to do that education with the managers and support networks out in the business as well will really help.
Yeah, I agree, Helen. And I think there's just a general message we all have to remind ourselves of, whatever generation we're part of, which is that it's really important we respect and treat everybody as individuals, because it's very easy to come up with broad universal statements. And actually, if we're focusing on inclusion, we're really thinking about the individual and we're not putting people in buckets. And so I think this applies both ways. I think this is the older generation not believing everything Jodie Foster says and, you know, being focused on negative perceptions of the younger generation. But I also think it applies to the younger generation. Helen, I know you told me that you recently were in a room with some younger people who were saying those who aren't part of our generation won't like Teams or Zoom, you know, and it's sort of like easy to make these generalizations. And so I think it's thinking about how to be inclusive of everyone, which is in my experience as a leader, incredibly time consuming, and at times feels like a lot of effort has to go into it, but the impact it has creates, you know, a virtuous cycle where people then take that into everything that they do, and they really think about including the needs of everyone, you know, whatever their background or their experience.
Thank you both, and yes, it's definitely time consuming, but it's a necessary thing for leaders and managers to do to bring that inclusivity and sense of belonging to the team and the conversation. So thank you for sharing those nuggets with us there. One final question we've got here. Anyone in the audience that has a last minute question, we still have a couple of minutes if you want to pop something in additionally. But the last one I've got here is about the research. So we talked today about a few different research on this generation, but there seems to be some contradictory sets of research out there on Gen Z. What do you think's behind that? And kind of how do we navigate that, particularly again when that internal audience is potentially only skewing towards one set of research over the others?
Helen?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. It's everybody's starting point, isn't it, in terms of what you know, their view and their take is. I agree. I even on my LinkedIn feed, I see so many different you know, thoughts and different things on different generations. But I you know, I'm kind of advocate for what we've been talking about today in terms of these generational things have always remained. It's just the context in which they're happening, and I think that's an important message.
Yeah, I think it's about watching out for those assumptions. And I guess it depends what the research is looking at, doesn't it? And it's easy to kind of turn the research and those assumptions into like horoscopes where we all just start believing it and actually looking for the reason behind it. Because one of my colleagues was reminding me earlier, you know, how there was that research done of children who were born at certain times of year are better at sport. And then you kind of keep telling yourself that, but actually it's because they're older and they're stronger and they're bigger, and they, you know, there's no magic in it, there is some logic behind it. So it's sort of really understanding, you know, the nuts and bolts, and I think it comes back to being, you know, really conscious of their context being different.
Thank you both. And yeah, that point about context and perceptions, I think they're the key takeaways for me from today's conversation. So thank you both. Steph, we don't seem to have any more questions in the chat. So I'm going to hand back to you if that's okay.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Georgia. So just a few things to end with for us to consider, and I'll ask Helen maybe her final thoughts on this. When we first started today, we talked about the sort of typical assumptions we all have about different generations, and Gen Zs have about, you know, boomers as much as the other way. And the danger those, you know, beliefs being presented as universal truths, you know, can kind of lead us into. And I guess where I want to finish is by reminding us that those assumptions go even wider. And even the generational buckets and labels are not universal, they're very much cultural centric. And those of you who work in global organizations may well have given this some thought. This diagram, it's, you know, it's from 14 years ago from Deloitte, but it just demonstrates how the definitions and the terminology varies around the globe. And ultimately, you know, it's a good reminder, I guess, to challenge all the labels and to check our own filters constantly when we work within global organizations. And it's easy to think we're talking about the same group of people when actually we're looking at things, you know, quite differently. And then I guess, you know, what can we do to make a difference in learning and development? How can we use all the information that Helen and I have shared today? And I suppose the first thing is to really focus on, you know, creating supportive and challenging environments, you know, that will impact learning environments and the sort of culture within an organization. So be aware of, first of all, the gap in context between yourself as an L&D buyer and the participants that you're working with, who may be early careers professionals, but I'm sure some of you have to work with other audiences as well. You know, be aware of your own personal and generational biases that you have. Engage in more psychological safety training and around, you know, creating an environment where people feel that they can be stretched and challenged. You know, make it okay for those young people to fail. You know, they need support to be pushed out of comfort zones and feel that testing and learning is okay. Thirdly, develop a shared language that can bridge the gaps between generations. So think communication skills and better learning norms in your organisation. I mean, one thing that people talk about, which Georgia and Wale, her colleague, is in the background, so you haven't seen, but they've both got their lovely ISE virtual backgrounds. Now, people say that actually that's a brilliant way of levelling the playing field, because if I've just left university and I'm in my parents' house and I'm in my bedroom, actually, you know, if I've got a virtual background that is the same as my colleague who is in her own house in her study, we look exactly the same, and that can help kind of level that feeling and that playing field. You know, when you're sat making conversation, you know, what did you do at the weekend? You know, is there an easier universal language? And always just thinking about how to include everyone. And then one area that we know, and Helen's talked about this, which the early careers professionals may struggle with, is connection. 65% of Gen Z said they struggle to make conversation with colleagues, and having been mainly remote, you know, for their whole education piece. So having in place a sort of networking infrastructure to get people meeting and practicing social skills will be really important. And, you know, networking was the top skill that the Brighter Network research said that graduates felt they needed to upskill on coming into the workplace. Secondly, around growth and purpose, I guess advertising the growth and upskill your organisation will provide to candidates. And as Helen quite rightly said, you know, role modelling through people who've been through the graduate programme. Even if you don't have the CEO who used to be on the graduate programme, what role models have you got around the business, and to help people see that they can actually grow and develop within your organisation. And then secondly, you know, grad loyalty is at an all-time low at the moment. So demonstrating your investment in their future through skills-based learning and progression increases your chance of retaining that talent. Some research shows 26% of grads said they would stay if they got promotion to a higher level, and 16% said they would stay if salary was competitive. And then finally, the kind of skills focus that I guess we're all thinking about in the learning and development world, you know, thinking about what, first of all, resilience might look like for different generations, you know, being aware of that differing context, and, you know, life experience wise, how people handle different situations, how they communicate about it. Secondly, ensuring that the importance of learning agility early in careers, both for employers and candidates while we're hiring, will go up to sort of meet the demands of the ever-changing workplace. So, you know, baby boomers are the ones who are incredibly agile. They've had, you know, 20 plus, 25, 30 years experience, and contexts have shifted a lot for them. But also we need to help people understand that, you know, skills have a half-life now, and it's very volatile because we're not really sure what the skills are we're going to need in 3 or 5 years' time. So actually learning to unlearn could be useful for those older generations as well. And then finally, creating a really strong learning culture, you know, not top down, but we can all learn from each other. Reverse mentoring is just making it possible to give feedback to each other and, you know, encouraging coaching skills that can make that better. So just to bring things to a close, Helen, I'm wondering your thoughts on 2 things. Firstly, what do you think we can do to kind of harmonise the way we work across generations within organisations?
I think you hit the nail on the head at the beginning. Is everybody needs to challenge their assumptions both ways. You know, no matter what generation everybody's in, I think that will really help. You know, to keep on talking to folks and keep on talking about the different generations and just do some myth busting along the way as well.
Absolutely. And then, what are your hopes, I guess, for the future in this multi-generational workforce?
My main hope is that everybody always respects their similarities and their differences, you know, and that everyone just feels safe to be themselves. I think for me that would be the ideal kind of utopia.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Helen. Let me hand back to Georgia and thank everyone for attending today.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Helen, for taking us through a really interesting set of conversations. There has just been a chat come in. I was just checking whether it was a question or not, but it wasn't. It was a great comment about universal language and how Cappfinity can help with that. So Anna, thank you very much for your comment there. I don't think there's a question in there. I'm just scanning it really quickly because we have a minute left before I need to say goodbye to everyone. So no question. Wonderful. But thank you for the comment. Thank you, Steph and Helen, for taking us through today's sessions, for bearing with us through the gremlins in the tech, and also for sharing such amazing insights with us. Audience, thank you for coming along today. Thank you for your participation as well. And we wish you all a fabulous afternoon and hope to see you again soon. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye now.